Louisiana, a land of deep history, Creole culture, and spectral whispers that float through the humid night air. The state is known for its eerie past, ghostly legends, and houses that seem to hold on to the restless spirits of their former residents. Tonight, we take you on a chilling journey through the 5 most haunted homes in Louisiana, places where the veil between the living and the dead is razor thin. Turn down the lights, check your surroundings, and prepare yourself for a terrifying descent into the supernatural. Welcome to the Haunted Tales. Whispers of the myrtles. The Spanish moss hung low over the twisted branches of ancient oaks, swaying gently in the humid Louisiana night. The air was thick with the scent of magnolia and decay as Elise Parker stepped onto the creaking veranda of the Myrtles plantation. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the white wooden planks, illuminating the grandeur of a house that had seen centuries of suffering. "Are you sure about this?" her boyfriend, Mark, asked hesitantly. He adjusted the straps of his camera bag, glancing up at the shuttered windows as if expecting a ghost to peer down at him. Elise smirked, brushing her auburn hair over one shoulder. "You promised me, remember? We do ghost tours, and the Myrtles is one of the most haunted places in the country. You wouldn't let me down now, would you?" Mark sighed, resigning himself to another one of Elise's paranormal obsessions. "Fine. But if anything whispers in my ear, I'm out." A tour guide met them at the entrance, an elderly woman with piercing gray eyes and a face lined with stories. Her name tag read Margaret. "You're here for the overnight stay?" she asked, her voice thick with a southern drawl. Elise nodded eagerly. "We want the full experience." Margaret studied them for a moment before stepping aside. "Suit yourselves. But listen well, this house remembers. And it doesn't like to be forgotten." The door groaned as they stepped inside. The interior was frozen in time, ornate chandeliers, antique furniture, and looming oil paintings. A massive mirror stretched along the grand hallway, its surface slightly warped with age. Elise swore she saw something move behind her reflection. "This way," Margaret instructed. "I'll show you to your room. And before you ask, yes, people have seen her here." "Chloe." Mark stiffened. Elise's spine tingled with excitement. "Chloe. The infamous spirit of the Myrtles plantation. A slave woman accused of poisoning her master's children, hanged in revenge, and left to haunt the halls for eternity. Their room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the moonlit garden. The 4-poster bed had heavy drapes, and the wooden floor was polished to a dull shine." Elise set her bag down and immediately pulled out her EVP recorder. Mark groaned. "Babe, can we just enjoy the atmosphere for 5 minutes?" She grinned. "You knew what you signed up for." As night deepened, the house settled around them. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant call of an owl echoed in the night. Elise sat cross-legged on the bed, recorder in hand. "If there's anyone here, can you give us a sign?" Silence. Mark yawned. "Guess Chloe's taking the night off." A thump echoed from the hallway. They both froze. "Maybe it's another guest," Mark whispered. But they were the only guests. Elise grabbed her flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The air felt heavier, like wading through invisible water. The chandelier above flickered. Shadows danced along the mirror at the end of the hall. Then footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Mark grabbed her arm. "We should go back inside." Elise swallowed. Just a little further. She raised the flashlight, and the beam caught movement. A figure, small, barefoot, a young girl in a tattered nightgown. She stood at the edge of the hallway, her face obscured by shadow. Elisa's breath hitched. Hello? The girl lifted her head. Her face was wrong. Black, empty pits where her eyes should be. Lips stitched shut. The air turned ice cold as Elise stumbled backward. The girl's head twitched, her feet hovering slightly above the ground. Mark grabbed Elisa's wrist, yanking her back toward the room. The girl's mouth ripped open in a silent scream. The mirror behind her shattered. Elise and Mark barely made it inside before slamming the door shut. Mark pressed his weight against it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. That wasn't Chloe, he panted. Elisa's fingers trembled as she hit playback on her recorder. Static. Then, whispers. Don't look in the mirror. A crash sounded from the hallway. Glass. Shuffling footsteps. Elise grabbed Mark's hand. We have to leave. Now. He nodded. They inched toward the door, pressing their ears against the wood. Silence. Mark turned the handle slowly. The hallway was empty. Glass from the shattered mirror lay scattered across the floor, but the massive frame still hung on the wall. Except now, the reflection wasn't theirs. A woman in a green turban stood in the broken glass. Chloe. Her lips moved. No sound came. Then, the reflection changed. A man in old-fashioned clothes appeared beside her. His face was bloated, skin tinged blue. A rope mark encircled his throat. More figures formed. Children. Women. Men. Their faces twisted in agony, all whispering without voices. Elise felt something cold at her back. Slowly she turned. The hallway was full. Ghostly figures stretched out toward them, mouths moving, eyes pleading. Mark grabbed Elisa's hand and ran. Down the stairs. Past the parlor. Through the grand doors. The moment their feet hit the dirt path, the air shifted. The weight lifted. They stumbled onto the gravel drive, gasping for breath. Behind them, the myrtle stood silent once more. The shattered mirror was whole again, and in its reflection, Chloe watched them leave. Whispers of the Lalaurie Mansion. The French Quarter of New Orleans was alive with its usual nighttime symphony, jazz spilling from dimly lit bars, laughter echoing through cobblestone streets, and the occasional clip-clop of a passing carriage. But just beyond the revelry, where the air turned thick and shadows seemed darker, stood the Lalaurie Mansion, an ominous presence in the heart of the city. Lena Parker had always been drawn to the macabre. As a journalist specializing in paranormal investigations, she had explored countless haunted sites. But nothing compared to this. The Lalaurie Mansion wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. The stories of Madame Delphine Lalaurie, the socialite turned torturer, had intrigued Lena for years. The gruesome tales of enslaved servants mutilated, chained, and forgotten in the attic were more than legend, they were history. And now, for one night, she had secured access to the house that no one dared enter. The heavy wooden door creaked open as Lena stepped inside, her flashlight casting trembling beams along the grand, decayed interior. Dust motes swirled in the air, disturbed by her presence. The house smelled of time, of aged wood, forgotten sorrow, and something else, something rotten. She began recording. March 5th, 11:42 p.m. Entering the Lalaurie Mansion. No signs of activity yet. The silence pressed against her ears. Every footstep echoed too loudly, as if the house was listening. She made her way toward the grand staircase, its balustrades warped with age. The steps groaned beneath her weight. The second floor was where guests once danced beneath glittering chandeliers. Now, it was nothing but darkness and decay. Then came the first whisper. A woman's voice, soft, distant. "Leave, before she sees you!" Lena froze, the hairs on her arms prickling. She swung her flashlight around, but there was nothing but peeling wallpaper and empty space. She took a shaky breath and pressed on. Her real goal was the attic. That was where the worst horrors had been uncovered in 1834, when a fire had revealed Madame LaLaurie's true nature. Enslaved men and women, tortured beyond recognition, their suffering carved into the very walls. Lena reached the attic door. It was locked, she frowned. That wasn't possible. She had been assured that every door in the house was open for her investigation. As she reached for her tools, something banged from the other side of the door. Hard. She stumbled back, hard hammering. Bang, then, a scraping sound, like fingernails against wood. She gripped her camera, forcing herself to breathe. "If someone's there, I mean no harm. I just want to document." The door burst open. Inside, the attic was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with an unbearable stench. Lena gagged, stepping inside. The floor was uneven beneath her shoes, like something had been spilled and left to dry. She turned on her camera's night vision. The greenish glow illuminated the room, and Lena's stomach turned to ice. Chains hung from the rafters, rusted but still clinking softly, as if touched by unseen hands. Deep scratches covered the walls. And in the farthest corner, a figure stood motionless. A woman, tall, dressed in a tattered 19th century gown. Her face was obscured by the shadows, but her presence was suffocating. Lena opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then the woman moved, not walking, floating, gliding toward her. The shadows peeled away, revealing a face twisted in agony, eyes black pits, lips sewn shut with rotting sinew. A choked, muffled scream burst from her throat as she lunged. Lena stumbled backward, crashing into the floor. The camera slipped from her grip, skidding across the wood. The woman loomed over her, reaching out with fingers too long, too sharp. Then, the whispers returned. A chorus this time. "Run! Run! Run!" Lena scrambled to her feet, bolting for the staircase. The air around her turned frigid, and unseen hands clawed at her back as she sprinted down the hall. The walls seemed to close in, the house itself breathing around her. The front door wouldn't budge. A sob of panic escaped her throat as she yanked, kicked, pounded. A cold breath touched her ear. "You'll never leave." The world turned black. The haunting of Magnolia Plantation. The moon hung low over the sprawling fields of the Magnolia Plantation, casting eerie silver streaks upon the ancient oak trees. Their limbs, gnarled and draped in Spanish moss, swayed as if whispering secrets of the past. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth mingling with the distant, ghostly echoes of forgotten voices. Elena Morgan gripped the steering wheel as she drove along the desolate road leading to the historic plantation. A journalist for a small Louisiana magazine, she had spent the past year investigating the most haunted locations in the South. Magnolia Plantation, with its bloody past of slavery, war, and whispered tragedies, was at the top of her list. Locals refused to talk about it. They called it cursed, claiming the spirits of the enslaved still wandered the fields, their pain woven into the very soil. Others spoke of a phantom woman, dressed in white, forever waiting by the river bank. Elena parked near the main house, an old Creole-style mansion with peeling white paint and broken shutters that rattled in the wind. The place was abandoned, but she had pulled a few strings to gain access for the night. Armed with a camera and a digital recorder, she pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. Echoes of the past. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of aged wood and mildew. Moonlight poured through the shattered windows, illuminating the grand staircase that led to the second floor. She shivered, though the night was warm. A slow creak echoed from somewhere deep within the house. Elena paused, holding her breath. Just the old wood settling, she told herself. Still, her fingers trembled as she clicked on her recorder. This is Elena Morgan, documenting my overnight stay at Magnolia Plantation. Locals believe the spirits of the enslaved and former residents still linger. I'm here to find out if the legends are true. As she moved through the parlor, she ran her fingers over an antique table. A sudden chill crawled up her spine. She turned, expecting to see someone standing behind her. But she was alone. Then, a whisper, soft, distant, but undeniably real. She lifted her recorder. Who's there? A pause. Silence. Then, a knock. It came from upstairs. Swallowing hard, Elena climbed the staircase, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. The second floor was lined with bedrooms, their doors ajar as if waiting for someone to enter. She stepped toward the largest room, the master bedroom. The moment she crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted. Her breath formed in a mist before her. Then, she saw a figure stood near the old fireplace. A woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her back turned. Her long black hair cascaded down her back, unnaturally still, as if untouched by the breeze that stirred the curtains. Elena's pulse pounded. Hello? The woman's head turned slightly, just enough for Elena to see her profile. Her skin was pale as bone, her lips blood red. Then she vanished. The slave quarters. Elena stumbled backward, heart racing. She had seen ghosts before, faint apparitions, fleeting shadows, but nothing like this. The woman had been solid, too real. Determined to learn more, Elena made her way outside toward the slave quarters. The cabins, long abandoned, stood in a solemn row. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering voices in the night. She stepped inside the first cabin. The air smelled of old wood and decay. A rusted iron bed sat against the wall, its mattress long gone. Shackles still dangled from the beams, a cruel reminder of the past. Elena lifted her camera. A strange pressure filled the air, pressing against her chest. The temperature dropped again, then a voice, low, guttural. Help us! Elena whirled around, her breath catching in her throat. Shadows shifted in the corners. She felt watched, surrounded by something unseen. The walls groaned. The floorboards creaked beneath an invisible weight. Then, a scream. Not human, something raw, agonized. It filled the tiny cabin, rattling the very walls. Elena bolted. The riverbank gasping for air, she sprinted toward the riverbank, where she had heard another legend, the story of Celeste, a Creole woman who had lived and died on the plantation. She had been in love with the owner's son, but when their affair was discovered, she was drowned in the river. They said her ghost still lingered, waiting for him to return. The water shimmered in the moonlight. A thick mist hovered over the surface. Then, a figure emerged from the fog. Celeste. Her gown was soaked, clinging to her frail form. Her eyes, dark, empty voids, locked onto Elena's. She lifted a hand, beckoning. Elena took a step back. Her body felt heavy, like something was pulling her toward the water. A voice filled her head, soft and pleading. "He never came for me." Elena struggled, fought against the unseen force drawing her closer. The water lapped at her shoes. Then a hand grabbed her shoulder. She screamed, whipped around, but no one was there. Celeste was gone. The escape. Elena ran. Through the fields, past the cabins, back toward her car. The house loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding. She didn't stop until she was inside her vehicle, hands shaking as she turned the key. The engine roared to life. Headlights cut through the darkness. And there, standing in the road, was the woman in white. She was closer now, her face fully visible. Her eyes were black voids, endless pits of sorrow and rage. Her mouth twisted into something unnatural. She raised a single finger, pointing directly at Elena. Then darkness. The aftermath. Elena woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. A fisherman had found her unconscious on the side of the road, miles from the plantation. Her camera was missing. Her recorder, gone. She tried to tell people what had happened, but they only shook their heads. "You're lucky to be alive," they told her. She never went back to Magnolia Plantation. But sometimes, late at night, she heard them. The whispers, the screams, the voice of Celeste calling to her, and she knew the spirits had not forgotten her. The haunting of Derrideur's hanging jail. The town of Derrideur, Louisiana, carried a peculiar silence after dark. The streets, once alive with small-town charm, turned eerie when the sun dipped below the horizon. But no place in Derrideur held the same darkness as the old Gothic hanging jail. Built in 1914, the jail stood like a relic of a forgotten past, its towering brick facade etched with time. Locals whispered about its dark history, about the prisoners who rotted in its cells and the 2 men who met their fate at the gallows inside. Though abandoned for years, the building was never truly empty. A bet with the dead Caleb Mitchell never believed in ghosts. He was a skeptic, one of those guys who laughed at haunted house stories and called them nothing but good storytelling. So when his best friend, Parker, dared him to spend a night inside the hanging jail, he accepted without hesitation. "The last guy who tried this ran out screaming at midnight," Parker smirked. "Said he heard chains dragging in the dark." Caleb rolled his eyes. "Ghost stories don't scare me. You'll owe me $50 when I prove there's nothing there." Parker grinned. "All right, tough guy. But you gotta stay until sunrise." At 10 p.m., Caleb arrived at the jail, armed with a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and his phone for proof. The massive iron doors creaked as he stepped inside, the stale scent of mildew and rust filling his nose. Dust clung to every surface, and the air was thick with a strange, suffocating energy. The cells lined both sides of the main corridor, their bars rusted and doors ajar as if waiting for new occupants. Faded carvings from long-dead inmates scarred the walls, messages of anger, regret, and madness. The echoes of the past. Caleb settled in one of the cells on the 2nd floor, setting up his sleeping bag near the spot where the gallows once stood. He checked his phone. 11:30 p.m. Piece of cake, he muttered, flicking through messages. Then, a sound out a faint shuffle, like boots scraping against concrete. Caleb froze. He turned his flashlight toward the hall. Nothing. Just shadows stretching like twisted fingers along the walls. "Parker's trying to scare me," he scoffed. "Nice try, man." But the sound came again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a deep, rhythmic creaking, like the groan of an old wooden beam under pressure, like a rope tightening under weight. Caleb's stomach nodded. He swung the flashlight toward the gallows, where prisoners had once met their end. The beam flickered. Something moved out. A shape, tall and gaunt, stood beneath where the noose had once hung. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if its neck had been snapped. Caleb sucked in a breath, but when he blinked, the figure was gone. "Okay, trick of the light," he whispered, forcing himself to stay calm. He lay down, pulling the sleeping bag tight around him, convincing himself it was all in his head. The unseen prison of the jail seemed to breathe around him, settling into a deeper stillness. But then, the cell doors began to rattle, point one after the other. Bang! 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 Metal clanged against metal as if unseen hands were trying to force their way out. Caleb sat up, his pulse hammering. His flashlight flickered wildly. A low whisper crawled through the air. "Let me out." The voice was dry, rasping, as if forced through lungs that had long since rotted away. Caleb grabbed his phone, aiming its light down the hallway. The barred doors swayed, but there was no wind. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Caleb scrambled to his feet, his breath ragged. The footsteps stopped just outside his cell. He couldn't see anyone, but the air was heavy with something unseen. Then, his flashlight beam landed on the floor. A set of boot prints, fresh, damp, appeared on the dusty ground, moving toward him. He bolted. The noose tightened. Caleb sprinted down the corridor, his breath coming in short gasps. He reached the stairwell, but the moment he stepped forward, an invisible force clamped around his throat. It was as if a noose had tightened around his neck. He clawed at his throat, gasping, choking, his feet barely touching the floor. The air grew frigid, and a voice whispered in his ear. "They left me here to die." Caleb thrashed, his vision tunneling. Just as he thought he would black out, the grip loosened, and he collapsed onto the cold floor. He coughed, dragging in sharp breaths, his hands shaking. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a man in old prisoner's clothes, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. "You shouldn't have come," the figure rasped. Caleb scrambled to his feet and bolted. Breaking free, the iron doors loomed ahead. He shoved them with all his strength, and they burst open with a metallic groan. As soon as he stumbled outside, the night air filled his lungs, crisp and cool. The weight, the suffocating presence, it was gone. His phone buzzed. It was Parker. "Dude, where are you? It's almost sunrise." Caleb turned back toward the jail. The windows were dark, empty. But just as he started to walk away, he saw in the second-floor window, a silhouette. A man with a broken neck, watching him leave. Caleb never spoke of what happened that night. He never took the $50, and he never, ever went back to the hanging jail. But some nights, when he closed his eyes, he could still feel the noose tightening around his throat. The curse of Lloyd Hall. The sun was setting over the Louisiana bayou, its golden hues bleeding into the dark waters of the swamp. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of damp earth and old wood. At the heart of the sprawling field stood Lloyd Hall Plantation, a grand yet foreboding relic of the past. Its white columns gleamed under the dying light, but the shadows lurking in its windows whispered of something far older than time. Emma Carlyle had always been drawn to haunted places. As a freelance paranormal investigator, she traveled across the country, documenting ghostly encounters. But Lloyd Hall was different. The stories surrounding the plantation were more than just legend, they were warnings. Ignoring the unease prickling her spine, Emma parked her car in the overgrown driveway. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their Spanish moss swaying like spectral hands reaching for the living. She checked her camera, flashlight, and voice recorder before stepping onto the creaking porch. "Only one night," she murmured to herself, gripping the rusted doorknob. The door groaned open, revealing the dimly lit foyer. Dust particles danced in the fading sunlight filtering through the cracked windows. The air smelled of aged wood and something else, something rotten. Emma's research told her that Lloyd Hall was cursed. During the Civil War, a wealthy planter named William Lloyd had built the estate, unaware that it was already claimed by the spirits of the land. The most infamous ghost was that of Marshall Montrose, a Union spy who had been captured and hanged from the rafters inside the home. Some claimed to hear his strangled gasps in the dead of night. Then there was the housemaid, Sarah, who had been accused of witchcraft and thrown into the bayou, only to curse the plantation with her dying breath. People whispered that those who dared sleep in her quarters would wake to find themselves paralyzed, unable to scream as shadowy figures loomed over them. A floorboard groaned upstairs, snapping Emma from her thoughts. She froze, listening. "Just settling wood," she whispered, but doubt gnawed at her. She walked deeper inside, her boots echoing against the warped floor. Dusty chandeliers hung like skeletal remains above her. The parlor still bore the faded grandeur of the past: antique chairs, a marble fireplace, and a grand piano coated in time's neglect. The floor above creaked again. Heart pounding, Emma pulled out her recorder. "If there is anyone here, can you make your presence known?" Silence, then a whisper, soft, inaudible, but unmistakably real. Emma's breath hitched as she played back the audio. "Leave now, before it's too late." A shiver raked down her spine. She turned toward the grand staircase. It loomed like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. The stories spoke of footsteps on the stairs at night, unseen hands brushing against skin, and shadow figures lurking just beyond sight. She hesitated only a moment before ascending. Each step groaned beneath her weight, as if warning her to turn back. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness. Emma's flashlight flickered as she stepped towards Sarah's old quarters. The door stood slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she was met with the stale air of a room untouched by time. The small bed was covered in a tattered quilt. A cracked mirror rested against the wall. Emma stepped inside, the wooden floor biting against her boots. A gust of cold air brushed her neck. The door slammed shut. Emma yelped, spinning around. Her flashlight flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows. Her pulse thundered. A creak, like someone shifting behind her. She whirled toward the mirror. Her reflection stared back, wide-eyed. But behind her, a figure. A woman, draped in shadows, her face obscured by darkness. Emma turned, but there was no one there. The temperature plummeted. Her breath came in rapid clouds. Then, a whisper in her ear. "Get out!" Something unseen yanked her hair. Emma screamed, stumbling back. She grabbed her recorder with trembling fingers. "Who are you?" she choked out. Silence. Then, a faint, distorted voice. "Sarah!" The door burst open behind her. Emma didn't hesitate. She bolted, nearly tripping down the stairs. But as she reached the bottom, the front door creaked open on its OWN.AN invitation? Or a warning. She sprinted outside, gasping for breath. The oppressive weight lifted the moment her feet hit the grass. She turned back toward the house, and froze. In the second-story window, a figure stood. A man, his neck bent at an unnatural angle, as if Emma's blood ran cold. Marshall Montrose. His lifeless eyes stared at her. Then, he stepped away from the window. A guttural whisper curled through the trees. "You should have listened." Emma didn't stay to find out what would happen next. She fled to her car, tires kicking up gravel as she sped down the long driveway. As she reached the main road, she dared a glance in her rearview mirror. Lloyd Hall stood dark and motionless. But in the upstairs window, a flicker of movement. Emma didn't look back again. She had spent her life chasing ghosts. But some doors were never meant to be opened, and some spirits never rested. Louisiana is more than just a state rich in history. It is a land where the spirits of the past refuse to rest. From the tortured souls of the Lafayette Mansion to the ghostly echoes of the Myrtles plantation, these homes are reminders that some stories never truly end. If you ever find yourself in Louisiana, tread carefully, because you never know who, or what, might be watching from the shadows. If you enjoyed this journey into the haunted heart of Louisiana, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new chilling tale. Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. This is the Haunted Tales signing off, but the spirits? They never sleep.